Top of the inning to you. Welcome to the Irish Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the Irish American Baseball Society. If you love baseball and if you love Ireland, stay tuned for a discussion of all things Irish baseball.
Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Irish Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Becker. On the show today, I'll have an interview with former Notre Dame All-American and former minor league baseball player Brant Ust. My colleague Jim Ward will also break down some audio from a current major league player with a strong Irish heritage. Jim will close the show with some more Irish American baseball history. Right now, let's turn things over to Jim Ward to get us started.
Thanks, Rick. On a recent episode of The Crack and the Bat on Irish Baseball TV, members of the Irish American Baseball Society got to see an interview with Kansas City Royals first baseman and right fielder Ryan O'Hearn. To watch that entire conversation, and for more episodes of The Crack and the Bat on Irish Baseball TV, visit irishbaseball.org. In this cut from that interview, Ryan O'Hearn talks about a road game against the Brewers where his family showed up to support him. Well, the support paid off for the left-handed hitter who got the chance to come off the bench and make some magic happen.
That was a good day for me. Just in batting practice before the game, I don't see a lot of O'Hearn jerseys, especially on the road, but I saw quite a few that day. Is all my family there. They had the O'Hearn jerseys on, and they're yelling and screaming during batting practice, and they were all fired up all game. And obviously they were disappointed that I wasn't in the lineup, but it was a lefty, and I figured that was going to be the case. So I kind of prepared them. Hey, I'm probably not going to start, but it's a National League game, so I could be in at any point. And then just the way it worked out was pretty crazy. It's weird, man. It seems like every time I'm on the road playing in a place where I have a lot of people there, or it's a familiar place, or there's something special, why, it means something to me, something good always happens. It's like the good Lord's looking out for me or whatever. But that was a cool moment, rounding second base. Obviously, it's great to hit a homer, especially put your team up, in a big league game, and that's huge. But, rounding second base and seeing, my dad just couldn't be smiling any bigger, and all his buddies around, his brothers and everybody. And it was a pretty cool moment.
That was Ryan O'Hearn on The Crack and the Bat on Irish Baseball TV. I'm Jim Ward, and you're listening to the Irish Baseball Podcast. It is kind of cool to hear Ryan talk about the support of having family around him. And a little history on Ryan Patrick O'Hearn. He was born on July 26, 1993. He was an 8th round pick of the Kansas City Royals out of Sam Houston State University, where he was drafted after his junior year, where he batted .292 with 8 home runs and 44 runs batted in 62 games. In his high school career as a senior, he hit .505 with 15 home runs and 55 runs batted in, earning him a spot in Baseball America's second-team high school All-American. He was not drafted out of high school in the 2011 MLB draft. He instead enrolled, played college baseball at Sam Houston, as we mentioned, and then was drafted in 2014 after his junior year. In both of those type of eras where you're playing in high school baseball and college baseball, you have your family around you a lot. It's when you start moving into the professional ranks where your family isn't around you as much. And growing up in Billerica, Mass, that had a town, we had a few guys that made the pros in multiple sports, from hockey to baseball to Major League Lacrosse and stuff. And talking to all of them when they come back after graduating and going into professional ranks, the one thing that they all say, it's tough not having your family around you. So when you do get that family support at the ballpark, whether they come out to visit you for your Major League debut or your first professional game, whether it's in the minor leagues or wherever it is, no matter where it is, to see them show up there wearing your swag, wearing your jersey, or wearing your hometown jersey, or whatever it is, it gives you that little boost. And Ryan eloquently talked about that and having that support. And, this year wasn't a bad year for Ryan. He played 84 games this year. He had 9 home runs, 29 batted in. Certainly a bounce-back year coming off the COVID season. He was one of those players that did test positive last year and only got to play 42 games and only hit .195 with 2 home runs and 18 batted in, so it did affect him. So having a bounce-back year this year and talking about how his family came out to see him, certainly gives you that extra boost to do well. Hearing Ryan talk about that was just really inspiring. And I know talking to guys like Tommy Glavine, Gary DiSarcina, his brother Glenn, some of these other guys, guys like Ray Bork, who I got to meet, and Johnny Busick of the Boston Bruins, and Cam Neely, and some other guys, they all talk about the one thing, having family. It's so important having your family there, especially when you're coming up as a young player. And Ryan O'Hearn is off to a great start with the Kansas City Royals, and we wish him the very best and hope to have him back fairly often here on the Irish Baseball Podcast and also on the Crack of the Bat on Irish Baseball TV. For more episodes of the Crack in the Bat on Irish Baseball TV, why not visit our website at irishbaseball.org. I will now turn things back over to my colleague Rick Becker. I'm Jim Ward, and this is the Irish Baseball Podcast.
We'll hear more from Jim with some Irish-American baseball history in just a few minutes. First, I recently had the chance to talk with former Notre Dame All-American and former minor league baseball player Brant Ust. Thank you for joining us.
No, great for having me, Rick. Thanks for reaching out.
So I think where I want to start here is talking about some of your Irish heritage, because I don't know if the last name Ust really screams Irish heritage. So I know it's there. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, Ust is as Hungarian as it gets. That's my father's side. But my mom, she's an O'Brien through and through, and her mother, my grandmother, Annie O'Brien, were first generation English. They settled and were born and raised in Burley, England, which is in Hampshire, in the New Forest in the southern part of England there. But my great-grandparents came over from Ireland and to England in about 1915. Margaret and Andy O'Brien from Wexford County, Enniscorthy and Clonroche were their two towns in Wexford County. So that's where you trace our Irish roots. Forget how many generations that makes us remove, but my great grandparents came over from Ireland in the early 1900s, and here we are dispersed throughout the United States as a result.
And you do mention that English heritage that you have in your background, and that played a part in some of your baseball experience, because you actually have 2 tours with the Great Britain national team. If you could talk about that for a second, I think that's really interesting.
No, it was a very blessed and fortunate childhood. We lived overseas in Europe. My parents met. My dad's an American. My mother's English, obviously. They met in Italy when my dad was in the Navy, and they got married overseas and decided to live the first, I guess, 10 to 12, or actually no, 20 years or so overseas in Europe. 3 other siblings total. My sister and I were born in Brussels, Belgium. I have a brother that was born in what was West Germany in Hamburg, and then an older brother that was probably the most traveled and European of us all, but he was actually born in New Jersey. And so we lived overseas, lived in England for primarily just outside of London. That's where I played my first baseball. I was actually joking with my 12-year-old the other day. I was on the UK Little League champion team of 1988. We came up short with that trip to Williamsport, but my baseball was played on U.S. shared bases there in the 80s in England. Still have family on my mother's side over there, and a lot of my childhood upbringing was England and European based, and it allowed me the opportunity, by being a dual citizen and having those passports, to be in one of my most memorable baseball experiences just overall in that 2007 European Championships, when we made a run at the Dutch for that Olympic spot. Came up short, but I think to this day it's the highest finish of a GB team at the European Championships.
And you also took advantage of having some of those different passports to play for Team USA a couple of times as well. So if we could hear about that, it's sort of interesting to compete for multiple countries in international play.
Yeah, a little bit of a free agent internationally. I had the good fortune, my first interaction with Team USA was on the collegiate national team after my sophomore year at Notre Dame, and got to play for the Hall of Famer Ron Polk on that team, and got to know a lot of guys. And that summer we based out of Tucson. We had to go qualify down in Managua, Nicaragua. Then we did an East Coast trip before we headed out to Sicily. for the World Championships. So man, that was a fun summer representing the USA. And then I had the opportunity when I was a professional to play on one of the professional teams in 2005 at the World Championships in the Netherlands, in Holland. Played for Davy Johnson on that team, so that was another wonderful manager and experience to have in that realm. And then I had the good fortune when I was done playing, Paul Seiler, I think I gave him such a hard time, but I wanted to work for USA Baseball and had a fun experience directing their 18U national team and alumni relations for a 4-year stint before I got into this collegiate athletics administrative role.
So moving around so much in your youth and playing baseball in so many different areas and different situations, when it came time for college, what made you pick Notre Dame? How did you even get on the radar for some of these places, considering you didn't have necessarily the traditional AAU background?
Well, so we moved back to the States. I was still pretty young, it was 5th grade. But I, from the onset, my dad had gotten me, he grew up a product of the New York, New Jersey subway alum. He was a Notre Dame supporter. We would listen to Notre Dame football on the Armed Forces radio growing up in the 80s in England. And then that kind of grew to listening to Joe Montana lead the 49ers on Armed Forces radio. And of course, being a child of the 80s, Joe Montana was my favorite athlete. And when I made the connection that he went to Notre Dame, it made me follow Notre Dame even more. And then as I got older and appreciated the academic reputation of a place like Notre Dame, an institution, and being an Irish Catholic myself, it was kind of not a matter of if, but when and how I'd be able to find my way to Notre Dame. And they used to play in a tournament out in Seattle, the old Kingdome. It was the Kingdome Classic. It was a great college baseball tournament that Washington would host, and Notre Dame came out every year. That aligned with my senior year, and they came out and watched me play and practice, and met with Coach Maneri and Coach O'Connor at the time, and all they needed to say that there was an opportunity for me to go there, and I was all in, and they kind of took off from there.
So you had the experience in college at Notre Dame, then you went and had a pretty long professional career, and then you come back and decide to sort of work back at the college level. Was that something that goes back to your time at Notre Dame where you really enjoyed the college game? What made you go that route, maybe instead of sticking in the pros in a different level or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I often think and wonder, but I continue to be informed by my student athlete experience at Notre Dame, and all of us that are student athletes at the college level that have the fortune and blessings to continue as a professional. And I emptied the tank. I played probably longer than I should have, and tried to play as long as I could. I had mentality that if you've got a uniform on, you've got a chance to try to get to the big leagues. And but when that time did come to transition out, I was ready, and I think it's unique to everybody when they feel that they're ready to move on. And I was very fortunate to have a Notre Dame degree and a wonderful network of people willing to help make that transition to life after baseball. I did coach my first year at the University of Michigan, which was tough for a Notre Dame grad to do, but it was a wonderful experience. My wife and I were living in Ann Arbor at the time, and it was just a great opportunity to re-engage with the collegiate setting. And I think that's really what directed me and made more present how important that time at Notre Dame as a collegiate student athlete was to me. And it continues to keep me engaged and informed with kind of the ever-changing collegiate athletics landscape.
You talk about feeling like maybe you stayed in the pro game a little too long, but I have to imagine that that you can't go back. So you have to try to get as much out of that experience as possible. If they're still paying you to show up to the ball yard, I can't imagine turning that down, right?
No, look, it's you're hooked as a kid, and being able to do that for as long as you can at the levels that you can. There wasn't much convincing, as you got older in the game, so to speak. You were met with the realities and challenges of maintaining that uniform and keeping it on, and making sure when you turn the corner in the clubhouse that your stuff was all still in your locker. But it's part of that drive, I think, that we all have and had, and that you wanted, you were 2 for 4 away from being in that lineup again and making a run at it. But the experiences too with the teammates, the coaches, I tried to go about my business in a good way, because it is so small, the world of sports, and especially baseball, that many of the folks that I either played with, played for, a lot of the folks that worked in the front office, a lot of those that took chances on me when I was a minor league free agent, I've leaned on them, they've leaned on me in this post baseball playing career. And it's great to have that ability to reach out and feel confident that someone will pick up the phone, or vice versa, that you can do something for somebody, because we all know kind of what we went through together. I've also become a great connoisseur of diners and drive-ins with all the minor league towns and cities I came through, and I find myself passing through every now and then, or especially working in a collegiate a campus atmosphere. When you ask somebody where you're from, I'm like, oh no, you've probably never heard of it. I'm like, well, try me. There's a good chance I passed through there or played a 4-game series at some point.
So I've moved around a lot in my life, not as much as you've moved around in your life, but I have a fair amount, and I lived in Pennsylvania for a while. I got to see you play when you were with Erie, when you were with Altoona. I think when you were with Toledo, you came a couple areas around me. So as somebody who is definitely familiar with going through small towns in Pennsylvania, I have to ask, are you more of a Sheetz guy or a Wawa guy?
It's a good question. I think I settled more Wawa, to be honest. They're subs. We're trying to make that $20 a day meal money, which I think, and gosh, I hope has increased. We were trying to stretch it as far as we could between trying to feed ourselves and also tip the clubby out. I think I settled more in the Wawa world.
To be honest, I was always more of a Sheetz guy, and I'm sure that his fans from his time with the Altoona Curve weren't happy to hear him pick Wawa. Sheetz was actually founded in Altoona, Pennsylvania. You'll be able to hear more of my interview with Brant Ust in a future episode of the Irish Baseball Podcast. He currently works as an assistant athletic director at Auburn. We will hear a lot about that role, and we'll talk about some people he met throughout his minor league career who have influenced him in his life. I'm Rick Becker, and we will now turn things back over to my colleague Jim Ward to wrap up the show with more Irish-American baseball history.
Thanks, Rick. Smiling Mickey Welch wasn't a big kid when he grew up in the largely Irish Williamsburg section of Brooklyn in the 1860s and 70s. Due to his lack of size, the right-handed pitcher had to learn how to focus on his control and changing speeds to get hitters out, even at a young age. He must have developed some pretty good stuff in those early Sandlot games, because he grew up to post a .307 and .210 record over 13 seasons with the Troy Trojans and the New York Giants. Although he made only one appearance on the mound for the Giants in 1892, so it would be more accurately described as a 12-year National League career. Welch's greatest season would probably have been the 1885 campaign with the Giants. The righty put up a 1.66 ERA en route to a 44-11 record, just shy of 500 innings pitched. As a matter of fact, he put up that sub-2 ERA in a season in which he also led the National League in walks. The prior season, 1884, Smiling Mickey set a big league record that still stands to this day, but he didn't get the official recognition for the feat until after his death in 1941. It happened on August 28th of that season. Welch started a game against Cleveland with 9 consecutive strikeouts. However, the New York catcher dropped one of those third strike pitches, and the batter reached first base. Many sports writers at the time would not credit the pitcher with a strikeout in such instances. It wasn't until years later that researchers looked into the situation and rectified the record. No major league pitcher since has started a game with 9 straight strikeouts. Smiling Mickey's parents, John and Bridget Walsh, were both Irish Catholic immigrants from County Tipperary. Information about his parents is limited, but it was around 1865 that a New York census first showed the change in the surname from Walsh, W-A-L-S-H, to Welch, W-E-L-C-H. While many speculate on the reason for the change, it did help differentiate the family in a Brooklyn filled with Irish families named Walsh. It is Welch that appears on Mickey's plaque at the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. He was selected by the Veterans Committee in 1973. At the age of 20, Welch married 18-year-old Mary Wellahan while Mickey was playing minor league baseball. Their 56-year marriage produced 9 children. After his playing career, Welch worked for a number of different jobs, from running a saloon to working in the milk industry, and most notably, returning to the New York Giants on occasion. At one point, smiling Mickey Welch served as an usher for the Giants, and by all accounts, he spent much time spinning long yarns about his storied playing career as he was helping fans to reach their seats. To learn more about Irish American baseball legends like Smiling Mickey Welch, visit the Irish American Baseball Society at irishbaseball.org. I'm Jim Ward, and this is the Irish Baseball Podcast.
For my colleague Jim Ward, Kansas City Royals player Ryan O'Hearn, and former Notre Dame All-American and minor league baseball player Brant Ust, I'm Rick Becker, and this has been episode 21 of the Irish Baseball Podcast.
You've been listening to the Irish Baseball Podcast. The Irish Baseball Podcast is a production of the Irish American Baseball Society. Visit us online at irishbaseball.org. And remember, there's no place like home.